Welcome back. Today we are going to be covering a video by Justin Riley Apple Dennis. The subject matter is with regards to welfare, and I had noticed Ranting Monkey, Some Dumb American, and even Roaming Millennial cover this, but as an Englishman with a somewhat different welfare system, although I'm pretty sure our views align to a certain extent, I thought I'd give a British spin on this, or a British take. Now I have covered Riley Justin Apple Dennis's videos before on transphobia and preferences, but welfare is something different, and as someone that has been on welfare before, against his will, it is a topic I'm happy to cover with a level of disdain and respect. Mostly disdain.
Alright, here's the thing. I have this really controversial opinion that poor people deserve nice things every once in a while. I think poor people don't have to be constantly suffering and struggling. I don't know why that's controversial, but here we are.
I hate your overlapping jump cuts so much. Now, on the subject of whether or not poor people deserve to have nice things, I'm sure there are quite a large number of very wealthy people, or people who are doing reasonably well for themselves, who do in fact look down on poor people, or those who are on welfare. There is a difference. You can be poor and on welfare, or be myself. Be somewhat poor but earn your way anyway, through self-employment. Your existence is hand-to-mouth either way, unless your benefit system is like the United Kingdom's, that while it has a benefits cap, does enable quite a large number of people to get away with claiming a significant amount of welfare to make their lives a lot easier than those who do in fact work full-time, and that's one reason I hold some disdain towards benefit systems. Well, to be more specific, people who abuse them, because those people are a drain on society. But we will discuss that later.
You've probably seen these graphics from Fox News that everyone made fun of a few years ago, where they were saying that poor people aren't really poor if they have refrigerators and microwaves.
Yes, and if I understand the argument correctly, it is the argument against items of convenience. Both the microwave and refrigerator qualify as that.
More recently, you may have heard about bills being proposed to stop poor people from spending food stamp money on soda, fast food, steak, lobster, all that kind of stuff.
I get the point you're trying to make about the government being all up in our business with what we spend our money on, but it is actually their money being given to you to help you through your troubled times. If they want to impose regulations to make it so that you don't make yourselves even worse off, or you get to the point, like for example you mentioned junk food, that you end up putting on so much weight that you need more money to sustain yourself, or if anything it creates a disability, meaning you end up becoming a more permanent resident of disability benefits, then they may want to be a bit more involved in your life. In my country they are, especially with those that receive disability benefits, with regular checkups to ensure that you are in fact still entitled to receive those benefits. Some of those checks are quite personal, and I would consider it normal, because you are not supposed to live better than someone who works. And benefits aren't supposed to be a lifelong thing unless you have a disability that makes it impossible for you to work. That said, if you're buying lobster, I bet you anything it's out of the trunk of someone's car, because I can't imagine, even in the United Kingdom or with our benefit system, you actually get enough money to buy decent lobster.
Or programs being put in place to drug test welfare recipients.
That's actually a really good idea. The government wants to make sure that those that receive welfare are not wasting their welfare on drugs, but are instead using it to sustain themselves while they look to improve their situation. If they can.
To me, it seems like all of this stuff kind of stems from two ideas. The first is that poor people have to be in a constant state of suffering to really be poor. So if they have any kind of nice thing in their life, they're suddenly not poor and shouldn't be allowed to receive any kind of government assistance. The second part of this is that people think they're entitled to morally dictate the lives of welfare recipients, because technically they're being paid with taxpayer money.
So to answer the first part, I'm going to talk about the UK's welfare system. People do all the time receive letters telling them they are no longer eligible for certain types of benefits, because in our country we have criteria. You have to be eligible by meeting certain criteria, or enough of a certain amount of criteria to qualify. Whether it be housing benefit, whether it be job seekers allowance, child tax credits, working tax credits, disability living allowance. All of these benefits exist, but you have to meet certain criteria to qualify. For example, job seekers allowance, you have to be unemployed, or working under 16 hours a week. There are other criteria, of course, but those are the most obvious. With working tax credits, you simply have to be earning enough to pay tax. With disability living allowance, that is means assessed. So whether or not someone is entitled to receive benefits entirely comes down to the individual circumstance. That is why we have criteria in place. Now to answer the second one, If the government has made it legal that you cannot use your welfare money to buy drugs or buy certain types of foods, then it is legal, it is not moral. It is immoral that they are putting you in the position where you can't go out of your way to buy that tasty heroin, I mean Lucky Charms, but it is official.
For the first part of that, I think people just have no concept of what it's like to be poor. Like, a refrigerator is a pretty basic amenity in the US. You kinda need it to store food. I can imagine like 500 scenarios where someone has a refrigerator and is still struggling financially. It's not like a fridge is some opulent sign of wealth. You could easily be living paycheck to paycheck, barely being able to afford your rent and eating instant ramen for dinner every night, while still living in an apartment with a fridge.
All of this is very true. It is why I mentioned criteria for eligibility for certain benefits earlier on. Whether or not owning a fridge is a sign of being poor or not is a ridiculous argument to make, to be honest. If anyone says, oh well, you're wealthy, you have a fridge, it's not an argument.
But that's not the only thing. Like, a lot of poor families have cars. A car is often a necessity in areas that don't have a good public transportation system. And lots of jobs even discriminate against people who don't have a reliable form of transportation. So if a person or a family is able to save up for a car somehow, that doesn't automatically mean they're not poor anymore. You can be struggling financially and have some old beat-up car that you use to get to work. Things that may have once been luxuries are now relatively accessible. Like smartphones, for instance. Lots of people seem to think that anyone who can afford a smartphone is not poor. But not every smartphone is a $700 iPhone. In fact, you can buy a smartphone on Amazon for like $50 now. And actually, lots of poor people rely on smartphones for accessing the internet. Because in the US, in 2017, you really need access to the internet to be able to function as a part of modern society.
Again, in this instance, you are correct, and I want to go a little further with it. You see, in the United Kingdom, I don't know if you have it in the States, we have these short-term loan companies. These short-term loan companies, up to a time, were not regulated, and because of that, a lot of people suffered, and there was a rise in debt management companies. Companies that made it so that people could put all their debts in one place, and made it easier for them to pay a reasonable amount rather than living way beyond their means, or living even worse off than they were. It's the same thing with banks and bank charges. The poor are the ones that suffer the most from this. This is from someone who is speaking from experience. Banks, up to a point, were not regulated on bank charges either, and they were pretty bad for it. With public transport, with cars, with phones, with fridges, it is not a sign that you are poor. It is also not a sign that you are rich. These are items of convenience, and that is why there are criteria that people meet. I've mentioned it before, and it is a slight criticism. When governments set out criteria for these benefits, or they have someone that does this, and they put a car on there, they do consider it a luxury item. But it obviously does not mean you are wealthy. Of course not. Because living standards are different in different areas. Benefits are complex. And it is very hard, in the United Kingdom especially, to balance out what is the cost of living over what you actually need to get by with.
I don't know what people expect. Like, everyone who has a roof over their head is financially secure? That's just not reality. Financial security requires a lot more than a refrigerator. It requires higher wages, because that's what being poor is. It's an income level. That's it. And if people want to splurge on some things using their very limited income, they have every right to do that.
Again, this is something I can agree with. However, if the government mandates they cannot spend it on drugs, prostitutes, cockfighting, then you cannot spend it on that. If you want to spend your money on a brand new iPhone, which I would recommend not doing because Apple is shit, do it. But if you're going to be put in a very difficult position, your only options are to struggle until you get your next paycheck or benefits, stamps, checks, whatever it is you receive. Or, and this is where short-term loan companies come into it, you take out a short-term loan knowing that you're going to be worse off in the long run. I will say that while I agree the internet is vital for a lot of what you mentioned, it is not the only way of achieving results. You can in fact do it in person. All of what you mentioned can be done in person.
If someone manages to spend less money on certain things so they can afford a nicer car or a nicer smartphone, that's up to them. We all prioritize our money differently. Some people spend more money on entertainment, like video games and movies and going out. Others spend more money on their clothes or their makeup or their car. People are different and will prioritize things differently, even if they're working with very limited resources.
I personally spend most of my resources on chocolate hobnobs.
I hate the idea that poor people all have to live the exact same life where they eat beans and rice and instant ramen every day and never splurge on anything and are constantly working to earn more money.
I really want to know who it is that says all poor people must live that way. By the way, beans and rice is actually quite nice.
People, regardless of their income level, deserve to feel joy sometimes. People deserve to relax and have some time to themselves. If someone has a bad day and wants to get McDonald's on the way home from work rather than cooking an entire meal at home, that's their business. If someone wants to relax after a long week at work by buying a video game or going out with their friends, they have every right to do that. Poor people shouldn't have to be in a constant state of struggle, suffering all day every day for their experiences to be valid.
While I was only really interested in touching on the benefits aspect of being poor, I am quite happy to talk about this a little longer before I give up on this video. By give up, I mean give up on Riley Justin Apple's video, because I agree with some points, don't agree with others, and I'm happy to talk about both. Now, if someone is poor and they receive benefits, and the government mandates certain restrictions on what they can spend their food stamps on, so be it. If they want to splurge and they find a way to get rid of their food stamps to get money to then splurge, that's their decision. They've managed to work their way around the system. And I don't think anyone invalidates someone's experience of being poor because they have an item of convenience. And these items are items of convenience because there are other ways around. For example, where I live, there are cars, there is public transport. But I walk everywhere. I walk several miles a day because I can. And I prefer to. Put some earphones in and I'm set. And a bottle of water. Got to stay hydrated after all. If you are poor and you struggle to get by and you are poor but you work, then I don't care. And I don't mean that in a callous way of, I don't care that you're poor. I mean, I don't care you're not relevant to the whole benefits aspect. Because there are people, certainly where I live, who abuse the system. And these are the people I take issue with. They would claim to be poor, but they have everything. They claim to be poor, but they have it better than those that work anyway. They claim to be poor, but they're not. They cheat the system to get everything from it. They milk it and they don't contribute towards it. And these are the people that actually cause more damage to the system. Because when there's reform to the system, like the benefit system, these are the people that brought it about to begin with. These people who would extort it for everything. In my country, we have benefits caps, and yet there are still some people who are able to work around the system to get more than they are entitled to. We also have it so that people who come to our country, refugees for example, or migrant workers, who do get a little assistance. Refugees, though, get quite a lot, in fact so much so that other people who are already here as a lower priority, even if they're homeless. One of the many reasons I despise the UK system is because there is an obvious priority, and it isn't towards the people here first.
Okay, so maybe you're okay with poor people spending their own money on that, but what about when they're on welfare? Because then they're spending your money.
Okay, so now we're at the parts that I am hugely interested in. But before you give what you think, I'm going to tell you what I think. 1. If the government mandates you cannot spend your benefits on recreational drugs to get high, then you cannot spend your money to get high. It is not their job to help you get high after all. 2. If you want to spend it on nice things for yourself and you're able to, then so be it. I don't care. Much like I don't care if you spend all your money within a day and are going to struggle for the next 2 weeks to the point where you have to take out a short-term loan. You bring it upon yourself. Again, if the government doesn't mandate you can't spend it on that, then so be it. And these only exist, these mandates, these rules about what you can spend it on, if at all, because people have abused it before and it has caused a rise in, as mentioned earlier, short-term loans, increased bank charges, more people struggling to get by, and lots of children going home hungry or going to school hungry. I focus on the children here because the adults are the ones who are supposed to be responsible here.
When we talk about welfare, we're usually talking about food stamps through the SNAP program or income assistance through the TANF program. Both of these things are relatively small chunks of the federal budget, but they're definitely still taxpayer funded. So shouldn't we have a say in exactly what poor people can buy with the money that's given to them through these programs? No, of course not. Because those people still deserve autonomy in how they choose to spend their money. It sounds really dystopian to imagine a society where rich people spend their money however they want while giving a small percentage of their money to poor people and then dictating exactly how those poor people can spend their money because of that.
For the sake of this video, I really don't care about the rich and how much they contribute towards the system. And I'm glad we agree that we shouldn't really get involved or care about what people spend their money on.
Like, your employer, just because they pay you, isn't allowed to tell you what kind of food to buy or what kind of stuff you're allowed to spend money on. The same goes for taxpayers and welfare recipients. But at the end of the day, I know this isn't about following the money. It's about poor people. Because without counting military personnel, the government employs almost 3 million people. That includes US Postal Service workers, judges, congresspeople, and even the president. So it's weird that we have different standards for poor people being paid by taxpayer money and federal employees being paid by taxpayer money.
Riley, Justin, Apple. You just compared welfare recipients to employees. people who do work and people who do not work.
Maybe instead of worrying if poor people are spending their fixed monthly welfare money on a $2 soda, we could instead worry about Trump's $1 to $3 million trips to his golf course every weekend.
While not overly keen on the amount of money it costs in travel to ship Donald Trump wherever it is he goes to play golf, I would like to point out that Obama wasn't exactly cheap either, and I don't recall hearing many complaints about it. Excluding all the ones from Donald Trump's Twitter feed, of course.
Or maybe we could require that all federal employees, including congresspeople, be paid minimum wage and not be allowed to buy anything except rice and beans and instant ramen. I mean, obviously we shouldn't do that, but can't you see how ridiculous it sounds that everyone paid by taxpayer money has to live like that?
Not really, but only because you are comparing employees to welfare recipients. That said, I would love to see Donald Trump eat rice and beans every day. Who knows, maybe some of that baked bean sauce might bleed into his skin and replenish his fake tan.
Oh, and one last thing, drug testing welfare recipients. Every program that has ever been put in place to do that has actually cost taxpayers more money because testing is expensive and they rarely ever catch anyone. I don't think I need to make a lengthy argument about that. The data is pretty clear. But just on a moral level, I think it's wrong to deny someone money that they need for food or rent just because they smoke weed or something like that. Get over it. Let people live their lives.
I can't really fault the drug testing aspect, but I do criticize, I am critical of, when you mentioned people who receive food and rent benefit spending it to smoke weed. That to me is unnecessary. If they can afford to and it is legal, go for it. Go nuts. But if you can't afford to and you miss a rent payment because you wanted to get a little high, then you're an irresponsible fuck and you deserve all the bad luck you get. And let's not forget here that if it is mandated that you shouldn't spend it on recreational drugs and you get caught out smoking recreational drugs so you're no longer entitled to benefits, you're not just poor, you are screwed. You then have to find a way to survive without the government's help, which was offered to you freely and you decided to crap on. Thank you all for listening.